Look at this sequence.
No, that doesn't fit the syntax, but the secondary codex suggests. It's a prefix, not a suffix.
Wait, what if it's mirrored?
She's right, the transposition matches.
You have successfully translated this script, and the contract is now yours.
The contract had been sitting on the long glass table for 3 days. 3 days. And nobody, not one person in that room, could read a single word of it. Rick Aston stood at the head of the conference table in his 45th floor office in downtown San Francisco, California, his arms crossed and his jaw tight. He was 45 years old, built like a man who had spent decades winning, and right now, for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was losing. Not to a rival, not to the market, to a piece of paper. A piece of paper covered in symbols that looked like they belonged on the wall of an ancient cave. "Tell me again," he said, his voice low, "how much is on the table?" His assistant, Derek Mills, cleared his throat. "Sir, if you can verify the terms of the contract and sign it before the deadline, which is Friday, Chenwei's entire Pacific infrastructure deal goes to Aston Capital. Shipping lanes, warehouses, 3 ports. The full portfolio is valued at somewhere between $200 and $250 billion. Rick said nothing. He just stared at the contract. The symbols looked almost playful, almost like someone had invented an alphabet just to mess with him. They curved and looped in ways that were neither Chinese nor Japanese nor Korean. The language specialist they'd flown in from UCLA said it might be a regional dialect script from a mountainous province in southwestern China, possibly mixed with something older. The man from the Smithsonian said it reminded him of Proto-Tibetan markings, but wasn't quite that either. The woman from Stanford's linguistics department had spent 6 hours with it, and left the building looking defeated. Chenwei, the 71-year-old Asian billionaire who had handed Rick the contract 2 weeks ago in Hong Kong, had said only this: "If your organization is serious enough to understand this, then you are serious enough to do business with." That was the deal. Translate it, prove you're the right partner, and the contract was yours to sign. "Bring in whoever else you need," Rick said. "I want someone in this room by 9 tomorrow morning who can read that thing." Florence Freeman arrived at the Aston Capitol building every morning at 6:30. She was 38 years old, quiet in the way that people are quiet when they're paying attention to everything. She wore her uniform, a navy shirt, dark slacks, and she moved through the offices like someone who belonged there, because she did. She had worked for Rick Aston's building services team for 4 years. She kept the executive floor clean. She kept the conference rooms stocked. She kept the coffee hot and the counters clear, and she stayed out of the way of people who thought she was invisible. Florence was not invisible. She just let people believe what they wanted. She had raised her son Benjamin, mostly alone. His father had left when Benjamin was 3, and Florence had picked up every shift she could find, worked every overtime hour available, and made sure that her son never went without. What she could not give him in money, she gave him in something else: time, attention, and the freedom to be curious. Benjamin Freeman was 14 years old, and he was, by any honest measure, one of the strangest and most wonderful children in the state of California. He did not play video games the way other kids did. He collected languages. It had started when he was 8, when Florence brought home a library book about ancient writing systems. She'd grabbed it by accident, thinking it was a picture book. Benjamin had opened it and never put it down. He taught himself the Phoenician alphabet in 2 weeks. He moved on to Linear B. He spent 3 months working through classical Sumerian, using free online university lectures. He learned to read Ge'ez, the ancient liturgical language of Ethiopia, because a YouTube channel made it look fun. He picked up Mongolian script because he liked the way it ran vertically. He studied Tibetan because a monk in a documentary spoke it, and it sounded like music. Florence did not fully understand her son's hobby, but she bought him the books, she kept the Wi-Fi paid, and she told him every single day that his mind was a gift. She just never imagined what that gift would do on a random Tuesday in October. Benjamin was out of school that Tuesday because of a teacher workday. Florence had told him to stay home. She had been very clear about that. "You are not coming to my job, Benjamin. I will be back by 3. Benjamin lasted until noon. He packed his backpack, a battered green thing covered in hand-drawn symbols he'd copied from various ancient scripts, and took the bus to his mother's building. He knew the address. He had visited twice before during summer break. The security guard in the lobby, a large man named Curtis who recognized him, let him sign in as a visitor and pointed him toward the elevator. "Your mama's on 45, Curtis said. "Don't get in nobody's way." "Yes, sir," Benjamin said. He found his mother on the 43rd floor, restocking a supply closet. Florence turned around, saw her son, and her face did the full journey from surprise to irritation to tired love in about 2 seconds flat. "Benjamin, Charles Freeman. I was bored. I told you to stay home. The Wi-Fi went out." Florence pressed her lips together. "You sit right there," she said, pointing to a chair near the closet. "You do not move. You do not touch anything. You do not talk to anyone." "Okay," he said. He sat for 11 minutes. Then he heard voices from down the hall, specifically the kind of voices that happen when a lot of people are frustrated and nobody is admitting it. He stood up, walked quietly down the hall to Heath, and stopped outside the glass-walled conference room on the 45th floor. The room was full. He counted 12 people around the table. Some of them had laptops open. Some had thick books spread out in front of them. 2 were on phone calls. One woman was writing in a notebook very fast. A man near the window had his glasses pushed up on his forehead and was rubbing his eyes. In the center of the table was a single laminated document, and from where Benjamin stood in the hallway, he could see the symbols on it clearly. He leaned a little closer. His eyes moved across the page. His head tilted slightly to the left, and then his eyebrows went up. He knew that script. He had learned it 18 months ago, in the dead of winter, when he found a forum thread on a linguistics hobbyist website. Someone had posted images of a rare regional script. A writing system developed by a small ethnic group in the Yunnan province of southwestern China. The group had created the script roughly 800 years ago to record medicinal recipes and trade agreements. It had fallen out of common use by the 19th century and was now known to only a handful of academic specialists worldwide. One forum member had posted a complete teaching guide they had assembled from field research. Benjamin had downloaded it and worked through it over 6 weeks, mostly because he liked the way the letters looked. They were round and looping, almost like a secret code. He had practiced reading it until he could do it smoothly. He had never imagined he would see it anywhere outside that forum. He stood in the hallway, looking through the glass for a long moment. Then he pushed open the door. The room went quiet. 12 faces turned toward him. A 14-year-old black kid with a green backpack and a calm expression, standing in the doorway of a billion-dollar negotiation. Derek Mills, the assistant, stood up immediately. "Excuse me, this is a private meeting. You cannot be here." "I can read it," Benjamin said. Nobody moved. "I'm sorry," said the woman from the linguistics department. Her name was Dr. Patricia Osei, and she had a PhD from Johns Hopkins and 20 years of experience, and she was looking at this child the way you look at something that doesn't make sense. "The document," Benjamin said, nodding at the laminated contract in the middle of the table. "I can read it. That's a Yunnan regional script, from the Naxi-adjacent dialects area. It's not commonly known, but it's not impossible to learn. I taught myself from a forum guide." Silence. Derek looked at the security intercom on the wall. "Wait," said Rick Aston. He had been standing at the far end of the room, and now he walked slowly around the table toward the door. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, and when he walked into a space, people noticed. He stopped a few feet from Benjamin and looked at him, not down at him the way some adults looked at teenagers, but level, like he was deciding something. "How old are you?" Rick asked. 14. "Who are you here with?" "My mother. She works here. Florence Freeman. I came to visit her." Rick looked at Derek. Derek had nothing to offer. Rick looked back at Benjamin. "You can actually read that document." It was not quite a question. "Yes, sir," Benjamin said. Rick stepped aside and gestured toward the table. "Then come show me." Benjamin walked to the center of the table and picked up the laminated document. He held it the way you hold something familiar, comfortably, without hesitation. He turned it slightly to get the angle of the light. Then he began to read. Not haltingly, not slowly. He read the way you read something you have read before. He translated aloud, pausing only to find the right English words for terms that didn't translate cleanly. He explained that one section used an older form of the characters, probably written by someone trained in the classical style, and that 3 of the symbols in the margin were annotations, likely added later, clarifying measurement units. Dr. Ose had opened her laptop and was typing fast. Every few sentences she looked up at Benjamin with an expression she couldn't quite control. The room was completely silent, except for Benjamin's voice. He finished the main body of the document in just over 9 minutes. He set it down, reached into his backpack, pulled out a composition notebook, and wrote out the full English translation in clear handwriting. He set the notebook on the table and pushed it toward Rick. There are 2 clauses in Section 4 that are a little tricky, Benjamin said. One of them is about what happens if either party dissolves their company before the agreement is fulfilled. The other one is about arbitration. Basically, who settles it if there's a disagreement. I tried to write it as close to the original meaning as I could. Rick picked up the notebook. He read. The room watched him read. He turned to Dr. Ose. Is this consistent with what you were finding? She looked like she was choosing her words carefully. I had identified the general geographic origin of the script, but could not decode the vocabulary. His translation is, it's internally consistent. The grammatical logic holds. I would need time to fully verify, but... She stopped, started again. I think he's right. Rick set the notebook down. He looked at Benjamin Freeman, 14 years old, green backpack, standing in the middle of a room full of people with advanced degrees, and he did something nobody in the room had ever seen him do in a professional setting. He laughed. Not a mean laugh, not a disbelieving laugh. A real one, full and genuine, like something had just loosened in his chest. How? He said. How does a 14-year-old know this? Benjamin shrugged. I like languages. It's kind of my thing. This one was on a forum and it looked cool, so I learned it. A forum? Rick repeated. Yeah. It took me about 6 weeks. Rick shook his head slowly. He looked at Derek. Derek looked like he needed to sit down. Florence Freeman was in the middle of wiping down a counter on the 43rd floor when she heard the elevator open, and Derek Mills stepped out looking for her. Mrs. Freeman, he said. Miss, she corrected, out of habit. Miss Freeman, Mr. Aston would like to speak with you, and your son. Florence's stomach dropped. What did he do? Nothing bad, Derek said. He paused. Actually, nothing bad at all. Please come with me. Florence followed him into the elevator. She didn't know what to expect. When the doors opened on 45 and she walked into the conference room and saw Benjamin sitting calmly at the conference table with a composition notebook in front of him and 12 people staring at him like he was something they'd never seen before, she felt a feeling she didn't have a word for. Pride was part of it. Fear was part of it. Something like wonder. Rick Aston crossed the room and extended his hand to her. Your son just saved something very important for me, he said. I'd like to talk to both of you, if you're willing. Florence shook his hand. She looked at her son. Benjamin gave her a small shrug. Like I told you, the Wi-Fi went out. They sat in Rick's private office, Rick behind his desk, Florence and Benjamin in the chairs across from him. The city spread out behind him through the floor-to-ceiling windows, all glass and afternoon light. Rick leaned forward with his elbows on the desk. Benjamin, he said, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly, not politely. Honestly. Okay, Benjamin said. What do you want? Not right now, in your life. What do you actually want? Benjamin thought about it. He was quiet for a moment, genuinely thinking, not performing. Florence watched him. I want to study linguistics, Benjamin said. Formally. Old languages, lost languages, the ones that barely anyone knows anymore. I want to help decode them. I think there's stuff written in those languages that nobody has been able to read for centuries, and I think that stuff probably matters. Rick nodded. And what's in the way of that right now? Benjamin glanced at his mother. Florence looked straight ahead. Money, mostly, Benjamin said. My mom works really hard. We do okay, but college, the good programs, that's a lot. Florence said nothing. It was true, and they both knew it. Rick was quiet for a moment. He looked at Florence. Miss Freeman, he said, how long have you worked in this building? 4 years, she said. In that 4 years, has anyone ever asked you what you wanted? Florence blinked. For what? For anything. She was quiet for a moment. No, she said, not really. Rick nodded. He picked up a pen and turned it over in his fingers. That document your son translated is worth, conservatively, over $200 billion in contracts to my company. I signed it this afternoon. The deal is done. He set the pen down. Benjamin, I am going to fund your education. All of it. A private secondary school with the academic program that fits what you're trying to do. Then college, wherever you get in. Graduate school after that if you want it. All of it covered, no strings attached. Florence's hands went still in her lap. Benjamin stared at him. There's more, Rick said. I'm setting up a foundation. It's something I've been putting off for too long, focused on gifted young people who don't have access to the right resources. I want Benjamin involved in it, not as a charity case, but as someone who helps shape it, because he's going to understand what those kids need better than I ever will. He turned to Florence. And you, he said, are no longer working in building services. If you want it, there is a position in our community outreach department. Full salary, benefits, regular hours. You don't have to take it, but it's yours if you want it. Florence Freeman had spent 14 years keeping things together through sheer force of will. She had worked doubles and triples. She had eaten peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so her son could have a hot meal. She had smiled when she didn't feel like it and kept going when she didn't have anything left to keep going with. She sat in that chair and she did not cry. She pressed her lips together and she breathed and she looked at her son. Benjamin was looking at her. Mom, he said quietly. I know, she said. She turned back to Rick Aston. Yes, she said. I'll take the position. The verification came back from Dr. Oze's team 48 hours later. Benjamin's translation was not just correct. It was, in her words, remarkably precise. One term in Section 4 that she had initially flagged as uncertain turned out, after further research, to confirm Benjamin's interpretation exactly. She asked if she could meet with him again. He said yes. They spent 3 hours talking about dead languages over sandwiches in a conference room, and Dr. Oze left that meeting having decided she was going to recommend him to every linguistics program director she knew. Chen Wei, when told that the contract had been translated by a 14-year-old boy who had taught himself the script from a hobbyist forum, was silent on the phone for a long moment. Then he said, through his interpreter, that this was the most interesting thing he had heard in many years, and that he would like to meet the boy in person when the time was right. 3 months later, Benjamin Freeman started at the Pacific Coast Academy in Palo Alto, one of the best prep schools in California. He walked in on his first day with his battered green backpack and a notebook in which he was already studying his 19th language, a rare Semitic dialect he had found referenced in an academic paper he'd read over winter break. He was nervous. He was not going to pretend he wasn't, but he sat down in his first class, and when the teacher asked the students to introduce themselves and say something interesting, Benjamin said, "My name is Benjamin Freeman. I can read 19 languages, most of which are extinct, and I'm working on a few more." The room was quiet. Then a girl in the second row said, "Wait, seriously?" And Benjamin smiled. "Yeah, it's kind of my thing." Florence Freeman drove to work in her own car now. A used but reliable one that Rick Aston had quietly made sure she could afford. And she walked into the Aston Capitol building each morning, not through the service entrance, but through the front door. Curtis, the security guard, waved at her every day. She waved back. She still made sure the coffee was good, but now she did it because she wanted to, not because it was her job. Her job now was helping to build the thing Rick had been putting off. A program that found kids in places nobody was looking. kids who were doing extraordinary things with nothing, and made sure they had what they needed to keep going. She was good at it. It turned out 4 years of being invisible in a building full of powerful people had taught her exactly how those people thought and exactly what they needed to hear to open their checkbooks. She was not invisible anymore. Neither was her son. On the night of Benjamin's first semester completion, straight marks, 2 academic awards, a letter of commendation from his linguistics professor, Florence sat at their kitchen table after dinner and watched her son spread out his notes. He was deep in a new script, something West African and ancient. He had his composition notebook open, his pencil moving, his lips slightly parted the way they always were when he was reading something for the first time. Florence put her chin in her hand and watched him. She thought about all the nights she had come home tired and pushed through it anyway. All the mornings she had gotten up before the sun. All the times she had looked at her son and thought, I don't know how I'm going to give him everything he deserves, and then gotten up and tried anyway. She thought about a Tuesday in October when the Wi-Fi went out. She smiled. Benjamin looked up. What? Nothing, she said. Keep working. He went back to his notes. Outside, the California evening was settling in, soft and golden. And in the Aston Capitol building across the bay, a new foundation was 3 weeks from its public launch, and a $200 billion deal was reshaping the Pacific trade market. And somewhere in a linguistics forum that almost nobody knew about, a 14-year-old's next language was waiting to be found. And nobody, not one person in any of those places, could say they saw it coming, except maybe Florence Freeman, because she had always known what her son was. She just needed the rest of the world to catch up.